This video is going to teach you how to write linear equations and inequalities given a graph. So a couple things to remember about graphing linear equations and inequalities is that the slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, and remember that m represents the slope and b represents the y-intercept. When we look at a graph, we're going to look at the difference between an inequality and an equation. So first we need to look at the line. Is it a solid line or is it a dashed line? If it's a solid line, that tells us that it needs to either be y is less than or equal to, greater than equal to, or equal to. If it's a dashed line, that tells us that it's going to be either less than or greater than. If there's shading, that means that it's a linear inequality. Okay, so then we know it's not an equation. A vertical line, remember, is always x equals, that's Vux is going to help us remember that. And a horizontal line is hoi, so that is always going to be y equals. So example 1, we're going to look at this graph and write either the equation or the inequality. So the first thing that we're going to need to determine is it an equation or is it an inequality, and how do you know? So the telling factor is there shading? Since there's no shading here, then we know that this represents an equation. Okay. The other giveaway is that it's a solid line. Now, if it's a solid line and there's shading, that's going to be an inequality. But because this is a solid line and no shading, that makes it an equation. So when we get to the end and we write the actual equation, we're going to use an equal sign. So now what is the y-intercept? Okay, so the y-intercept we can find on our graph. Where does it hit the y-axis? And it hits at 1. So this right here is the y-intercept, so at 0, 1. And since we're going to be writing it as y equals mx plus b, that means that b is equal to 1. So now for the slope, I need to find points on this line and determine what my rise over run is. I know that the slope is going to be negative because the graph is going up and to the left or down and to the right. So we want to look to see where we see another point on our graph. So I see one here at -2, 4. Okay, so that would mean that this is rising 1, 2, 3 and running 2. And my hint to you would be make sure that that continues to work. So if I go up 1, 2, 3 over 2, does that hit my line again? And it does. Okay, what about if I go in the other direction? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, that also hits my line. Okay, if it doesn't, then you probably didn't pick an exact point and you need to try to find a better point to use to find the slope. So the slope is going to be negative, rise 3, run 2. So -3 over 2. So now I can write my equation because I have the slope and I have the y-intercept. It's always in the form y equals mx plus b. So this is going to be y equals my slope, which is -3 over 2, x plus b, so plus 1. For example 2, does it represent an equation or an inequality, and how do you know? So right from the beginning, we can tell that this is going to be an inequality, and the reason is because we can see shading. Okay, so whenever there's shading on a graph, that tells you that it's an inequality. What is the y-intercept of the graph? So where does it hit my y-axis, which is right here? So at 0, -4. And so that means when I'm writing the actual inequality at the end, that b will be equal to -4. Okay, what is the slope? So on inequalities especially, you need to be very, very careful, especially with a dashed line, that you're making sure you're continuing to count the slope to ensure that you have the right rise over run. So on this one, it looks like I'm rising 1 and then there's a point right here. So I'm running 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then again, make sure that that continues to work. So rise 1, run 1, 2, 3, 4, and that hits perfectly on my line. And we can check the other direction. So down 1 over 1, 2, 3, 4. So my slope is positive 1 over 4. All right, so I have everything that I need to write my slope-intercept form. I have my slope and I have my intercept. What I'm missing is what symbol I'm going to use. I know that since it's an inequality, I'm going to use greater than, less than, greater than equal to, or less than or equal to. So because it's a dash line, that helps me eliminate 2 of them, and I know it's either going to be greater than or it's going to be less than because it's dashed. So now I need to look at my shading. Where is my shading in relation to the line? Is it greater than and above the line, or is it less than and below the line? Remember, it's y is greater than or y is less than. So looking at the y-axis, is everything shaded above this or below that line? And everything is shaded above. So that means that we are going to use greater than. Shading above. So for my inequality, it's going to be y is greater than mx plus b. So my slope is 1/4 x plus b, so minus 4. For example 3, we are now given 2 points, and we want to write the equation given those 2 coordinates. So the first step is always going to be to find the slope. And to find the slope, I would use the formula for slope. So the formula for slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And it doesn't matter which point you consider to be x1, y1, and which point you consider to be x2, y2, as long as you go in the same order. So we know this is x, this is y, this is x, and this is y. So if I start with -7 in the numerator minus -2, that means that I need to start with 6 in the denominator minus -4. So again, just make sure you go in the same direction when you do the slope. So -7 minus a -2 would be -5, and 6 minus a -4 is 10. And then we can simplify this to -1/2. So that is my slope. So now to find the y-intercept, what I'm going to do is use the equation y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to substitute what I know. So I know that my slope, that m is -1/2, so I can go ahead and say equals -1/2. And then I know an x-coordinate and I know a y-coordinate. So I can use either of the ones that are given to me in my equation. So let's say I use the first one. That means that x is -4. So I can substitute -4 in for x. And then I know that my y value is -2. So I can substitute in for y -2. I don't know the value of b, that's what I'm trying to find, so plus b, and now I can solve this since it's just a one variable equation. So first multiply -1/2 times -4, which would be +2. Bring down the -2 plus b, and now I can just move the 2 to the other side. So this cancels, and b is equal to -4. So that was the hard work, and now I have step 3 is just to write the equation. And now I have everything I need for the equation. So my slope is -1/2, x, and then my y-intercept is -4. And that would be my final answer. So our last example is very similar to example 3. We're going to utilize the same steps. First find the slope, then find the y-intercept. Once you have those two pieces of information, you can write the equation. Okay? Now, this table, don't let that confuse you. It essentially just gave you 4 points. So you have the point -2, -7. You have the point 0, 1, 2, 9, and 5, 21. So there's two different ways that we could find the slope. We could do exactly like we did in example 3, utilize the slope formula, y2 minus y1, all divided by x2 minus x1, and that would give us the slope. We can also remember that slope is the change in y over the change in x. So how much are each of my y values changing divided by how much are my x values changing? So from -7 to 1, I'm going up 8. From 1 to 9, we're going up 8. From 9 to 21, we're going up 12. Then how are my x values changing? From -2 to 0, we're going to the right 2. 0 to 2, we're going to the right 2. From 2 to 5, we are going to the right 3. So what is my change in y divided by my change in x? So my change in y is 8 over my change in x is 2, which is equal to 4. So my slope is 4. And if we look at the end, it would be the same as if we did the change in y being 12 over the change in x being 3. That's still 4. So my slope is 4. So now to find the y-intercept, we could again utilize the same process we used in example 3. Y equals mx plus b. We have the slope. We can plug any of those points in for x and y and solve for b. Or look at your points very, very, very carefully. This point right here that it gives us is our y-intercept. So we actually already have b is equal to 1. So now to write the equation, y equals, I've got my slope is 4, so 4x, and my y-intercept is at 1, so plus 1, and that would be my final equation.